Hi and welcome to Wind Up. I'm Meg.
And I'm Campbell. This is our producer profile of Hambledon Vineyard.
Hambledon is one of the newer and definitely one of the most ambitious producers on the English sparkling wine scene. They're also one of the most historical, with their first vineyard having been planted in 1952.
We are going to meet Ian Kellett, who is the owner at Hambledon, and we'll also be hearing from Katrina Smith, who is the tour and education manager. So let's hand over to those guys to learn a little bit more about their background and approach to winemaking.
Hambledon Vineyard is England's oldest commercial vineyard. It was established in 1952 originally by a man called Major General Sir Guy Salisbury Jones, who was a British military officer and had the privilege of being introduced to Sir Winston Churchill during his military career, who, as you may know, did enjoy his booze, particularly his champagne, and his absolute favourite was Paul Roger champagne. And Sir Winston Churchill actually introduced Sir Guy to the Paul Roger family during his time in France. So when Sir Guy came back and retired in the UK, he settled in this house that you see behind you here in Hampshire, in Hambledon. And his stepson, John Yarborough, who went on to be a big part of the Thwaites brewery business, persuaded him to get back in touch with his friends at the Paul Roger and essentially help him to plant a vineyard here so that he could have a little bit of France, if you like, on his back doorstep.
I bought the place in '99 and they'd been making still wine for 50 years. I tasted the still wines and decided to switch to sparkling wine. I then did geological research and climatic studies for a couple of years and went to wine college. And then in 2004 we planted a 10-acre test bed of 27 clone and rootstock combinations of vines of Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Meunier, which is far more than you'd normally ever plant. But we wanted to see if we could grow these varieties, and if we could, which combinations would perform best. And that doesn't just mean give you the most grapes, it means technically in terms of various parameters enologically that one's using. Hambledon's also not quite the birthplace of cricket. There are many places that lay claim to that, but Hambledon's called the cradle of cricket. So it's where the rule book of cricket was written, in that pub just up there. Thomas Lord was a member of Hambledon Cricket Club, and when he went to London and commissioned Lord's cricket ground, that's when the rule book was moved from the Bat and Ball pub up to Lord's. So our cunning little plan is, in one generation of human life, to build a global brand the size of Paul Roger worldwide, instead of in 5 generations, from England's oldest vineyard and the birthplace of cricket. That's what we're about. And trying to make the best wine possible as well. My undergraduate degree at university was biochemistry. Right. So I then try and bring as much science to what we're doing here as I can. And we try and learn very hard from champagne. So I only did O-level French, but I've improved my French to the point where I'm close to fluent, and certainly enologically, I speak fluent enological French. So we do all our winemaking in French. Our head winemaker's Champagne chef de cave. There are only 22 chef de cave in Champagne, so one of them leads our winemaking team. Because I figured the world's best body of information on making sparkling wine is 105 miles south. Yeah. Why would I ignore it?
These are our Chardonnay vines, and those buds, as you can see, very exciting that you've come at bud burst here. These buds then create shoots that grow vertically up, and they clamber onto the trellising and hoik themselves up to the sunshine. And then they produce lots of leaves. So all of this, in about 2 months, will just be full canopy.
The vast body of chalk in the South Downs is in Hampshire. I would say off the top of my head, 65% of South Downs chalk is in Hampshire. I passionately believe that Hampshire will become England's vineyard because of the geology. So this is where the big body of chalk is. And if we are going to produce hundreds of millions of bottles in the future, and if it's going to be grown on chalk, there'd be only one place you'd be able to do it, sir.
Across this south coast area, and specifically Hampshire, we have this beautiful chalk which exists in the Champagne region as well, that dips out under the Channel and comes up around Paris and Champagne. And we also have this beautifully cool climate which enables the grapes to ripen slowly, so that when the bottles mature over time, when you open that bottle of fizz, you have this wonderful freshness from the acidity.
We're aiming to use the the chalk-based fine acidity of Chardonnay, and bearing in mind what I said about the chalk being the same as Champagne and the climate here being marginally cooler than Champagne, I think that creates the opportunity for more finesse, more fineness, more precision in the wine, generically, if you use it well. And so what we're aiming to do is to create an incredibly precise style of aperitif. So the way and Chardonnay led. And I think some people in England are making a mistake by trying to soften the acidity in their wine by having more Pinots. I think that's a mistake. I think you go with what God's giving you and you perfect it. It takes longer and costs more. But the way I think of it is we're thinking of it like, and this is going to be a strange picture to people, but it's what I have in my head. I think of, like, imagine a dartboard with a pinprick accuracy in it, and it's maybe 10 feet away, and it's above you. I think of, when I taste our wines, and when we're blending our wines, I think of a piece of cotton almost going from my palate as a precise line, straight up, and it's elevating to that point on the dartboard. So that's the precision I'm looking for, and that's the line of the acid. And that gives lightness, it gives precision, it gives elegance, and purity. And then off that we hang the other elements of depth and flavour and texture. And actually, to be fair, the chalk-based Chardonnay gives good texture to the wine too. So generically across our wines, we're looking for utilising the acid. When I worked in banking, our head of trading used to say, if you don't give me risk, I can't manage risk. Right? I want risk, give me risk. My job is managing acid. If you don't give me acid, I can't manage acid. So we've got to take that acidity and manage it in a way that creates a wonderful feel in the palate. And that's what we're aiming to do. So we make non-vintage wines because it makes a better quality of wine and it allows us to retain consistency. We don't want, because we've got this difficult English climate, we don't want that going on with the quality. We're trying to build a global brand. So we make non-vintage wines and hold reserve wines. And we're trying to make our Premier Cuvée be the best bottle of English sparkling wine in the market, year in, year out. And off that, build the reputation of the brand. And to help support, and we've already seen examples commercially of why that's worked for us and where we've won substantial orders and contracts because they've tasted the Premier Cuvée, they're actually buying the Classic Cuvée. But they know that we're making the best sparkling wines in England, and therefore why wouldn't you work with us? Exactly.
Yeah. Ian has deliberately taken a very champagne-like approach to Hambledon's winemaking, but the taste of the wine and the overall aesthetic is much more English in approach.
Definitely. I think in order to go up against those big, very well established champagne brands, you need a strong identity, and we think they've nailed it. These are 3 incredibly beautiful bottles. This one especially, I know Campbell agrees. The logo is fantastic, very British. The styling, the lot, it couldn't be anything other than British.
And if you want to compete against Champagne, you have to rise to the same level of occasion as those guys do. These bottles do that. The contents deliver as well. And they're clearly trying to occupy that sort of headspace of classic English summer. But instead of strawberries and cream at Wimbledon with Champagne, they want you to be thinking about Hambledon at Wimbledon.
Hambledon is definitely wrestling for position with Pimm's, I think, as the go-to English summer drink. 100% has to be added to every garden party list. You need your cucumber sandwiches. Does anyone do that anymore? I'm not sure. You need your Pimm's and you need your Hambledon.
I'm from Glasgow. There'll be no cucumber sandwiches for me. But if you are ever in the Hampshire area, it's a great place to visit. Hambledon Village itself is lovely and they're all superbly welcoming. So let's hear a bit more from the guys.
If you're a wine lover and you put wine into your holidays and your vacations, so you really are in that sort of thin slice of people who are really sort of alcoholic nuts. The vineyards that you've been and visited in the world, where you've still got an image in your mind, even 10 or 20 years later, of what the place looks like, builds a connection in you. And when you see that brand on the supermarket shelf, you're connected. So, but you normally have to travel 500 to 1,000 miles to 5,000 miles to go to these places. We're 60 miles from possibly the world's most important city right now. Certainly one of the top 5 and maybe the top 2. But I'd like to think that in all kinds of ways, London's now the most important, coolest and hippest city in the world. Sorry, San Francisco. And it's just here. I mean, we're closer to London than Napa is to San Francisco.
Wow, yeah.
So wine tourism and the big part of what's happening with English sparkling wine is happening in the South Downs. I'm not saying there aren't other areas, there are, and sorry everybody, but it's all within 60 miles of London. Get on a train, get out of town, come here, taste the wines, and especially, by the way, the weather is always like this here in Hambledon, so even in February when it's snowing everywhere else, that's why we put the vineyard here. It's gloriously sunny. You're welcome anytime. We want people to come here and see it, and there's a nice enough house, there's the cradle of cricket, there's plenty of history, it's a beautiful valley, it's a lovely place to come, and crucially we do it all here. So we grow our own grapes here on the site, we pick them, we press them, we bottle them, we disgorge them, we label them, we do everything here so you can see the whole thing.
Our winery is the only fully gravity-fed winery in the UK. That means that our winery is set out over 4 floors. Our grapes go into trays, they're brought up on trailers to the bottom of the winery where the lift is outside. The grapes are then brought up to the very top floor where we're going to walk to shortly. The grapes are pressed and the grape juice falls from the top floor to the floor below where it's then fragmented. So we actually separate the grape juice out into different sections. And then that grape juice comes down into these tanks where it's then settled. The grape juice then goes down to the next floor down where there's access into the lift again, and it travels across up into the lift and then down into these large fermentation tanks over on this side. So what we're doing is we're using gravity to do the work for us. We believe that you create a much more natural, elegant juice by allowing it to flow by gravity, and then we carry it up and let it drop again. So you're creating a cycle and ensuring that there aren't any negative, bitter phenolics at all in your aromas and flavours in your grape juice. So you're creating as natural a juice as possible. And this whole philosophy is called minimal intervention winemaking.
We use a lot of Champagne's techniques, but I think that there are fundamental errors of quality in their system, which exist for good reasons, but we don't have to follow them because we're starting from fresh. So we have to prove that we can match and then do better. And then from a branding point of view, the reason that we're not going champenois with the branding is that's our emotional connection. It's English, 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 English. We're England's oldest vineyard from the birthplace of cricket, made by a couple of Yorkshiremen. And we want to play very gently, and it has to be subtle, especially in the world we live in today, with the English-French relationship that goes back a long time. And there are lots of Brits, but particularly Englishmen, who will feel supportive of England as opposed to France. Yes. Most bizarrely, in Champagne of all things, I actually think Champagne now has a branding disadvantage compared to English sparkling wine. And I'm probably at the forefront of thinking that, and I think that will evolve and become clear over the next 20 or 30 years. To displace a leading product in a marketplace, a leading brand, and especially one as powerful as Champagne, when you think about it, I mean, it's probably the world's strongest wine brand. So we're not just taking on France's strongest wine brand, we're taking on the world's strongest wine brand from the back garden. But even if we weren't talking about wine, if we were talking about taking on Coca-Cola, what you need to displace a leading market incumbent in any category is a better quality product at a commercially more attractive proposition. You can call that cheaper if you like, but I prefer to think of it as a commercially more attractive proposition because it means a whole load of things, but let's summarise it as cheaper. And you've got to give them a brand and emotional reason for making that switch. And if you had a better quality product that was cheaper and it was more emotionally connected to you, why wouldn't you? I'm not saying everybody will, but an awful lot of people would choose to make that switch. So that's our mission.
When you see the tasting room later, you'll see a bottling line, if you like, from left to right, which shows the evolution of Hambledon from the flute-shaped bottles that Sagai used to produce his still dry white wines from those French hybrid vine varieties, right up to the sparkling wine that we produce today.
So one of the things that we've done here that's incredibly expensive and long-term, and it's fundamental to what we do with our business and how we build this brand, is that we are growing all our own grapes.
Hambledon really has a startup vibe. They've looked at champagne and everything they do well, they've brought it over here, they've tweaked it and made it better. Think of Ian as the Elon Musk of wine if Elon Musk had a dynamic personality.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing with Ian is really warm, really engaging guy. I got the strong impression that he'd have happily chatted to us for another couple of hours about wine, and he was already very generous with his time. And a guy who's very successful, who's built a great business, but there's not a hint of arrogance there. You know, he's got that sort of calm and in control demeanor, an understated confidence that comes from really knowing your stuff. Because he and his team are fantastically meticulous in everything they do. Everything's really thought through, everything's planned, everything's done with a purpose. And they've invested in quality right from the beginning in terms of materials, equipment, personnel, and expertise. And that just shines through in everything they do.
And their ambition isn't just limited to the wine. They have some serious expansion plans too.
If you start with the context that this is the birth of English sparkling wine, and we've got to get to hundreds of millions of bottles a year, it's going to be a permanent process of expansion for 500 years to come. So what day are we today? We're Saturday. Starting on Wednesday, we're going to quadruple the size of the vineyard. So that means that now it takes 3 to 4 years to get fruit from the vines, and it takes 3 to 4 years to make wine. So we're probably 6 to 7 years away. So 2024, 2025, our production should be, depending on the yield in a year, about 650,000 bottles a year. We've got the winery built for it, so that extension we've just put on the winery that you've seen, that's all part of that. And we're in the process of building a 2 million bottle underground cellar cut down into the chalk. We've bought our own JCB so we can DIY, because Brits love DIY, right? We've got to get in there with that. So we've bought our own JCB to dig it all out. But it will be, just like in champagne, it will be cut down into the chalk, underground, for the temperature control and the humidity. And we're going to create a little arched, way deep underground, we're going to create a little arched tasting room in the chalk, directly in the chalk, so that we can take people in there and show, look, it's just like. So 650,000 bottles, 500 to 650,000 bottles a year in 6 or 7 years' time. That gets me to half of the plan for my lifetime, which is to make a 1 million bottle a year brand, all from estate-grown fruit, from England's oldest vineyard and the birthplace of cricket. The South African winemakers have asked if they can come here and play a match against the English winemakers on our cricket pitch, because the broad halfpenny down cricket pitch at the bat and ball, upturned saucer, if you get a clip on the ball, it runs and runs and runs. So, and we'll end up doing that with the Aussie winemakers, and we'll end up doing it with the New Zealand winemakers and the South Africans, and it will become an integral part of the wine community. And we've got cameras up all around. We'll put cameras up all around the pitch when the Aussies come, just to make sure they're not. You know.
Yeah,
No sandpaper.
Because we know what you like. We've 230,000 new vines to plant. Bill, I haven't mentioned Bill Carkery, who lives down our drive, was the winemaker here from 66 to 94. And he's still here in his late 80s. And he planted some of the old vines by hand with a spade, with strings laid out on the ground too. So if we were doing 230,000 in that way, we'd be there for months. But we'd get in about 15,000 plants a day, maybe 15 to 20,000 depending on the day. The way it works is that if you imagine a long flat plough blade, a bit like the dagger board on a boat, on a sailing boat, that cuts down into the ground, so that gets pushed down into the ground, and so here's the plough blade, and then in the middle of the plough blade, it's got a little open hole like that, if that makes sense. So this bit's in the ground, and there's an open hole, like a chute that goes right the way through the plough blade, but the plough blade goes either side of the hole. So you push the plough blade into the ground, and sat above this hole there's a flywheel, and it drops a vine into the chute hole every whatever your spacing is. And so the plough blade goes along, and it's vine, 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 and it goes, it's just, I mean, it's driving. It's driving and like all great things in life, it's so simple when you've no idea how it would happen, and then you see it and you think, oh, yeah, that's really easy.
Yeah.
So over the next few years, we should be able to increase our production from 100,000 bottles a year, eventually in 20 years to 1 million bottles a year. So you're seeing Hambledon right at the beginning of its journey. We're now 13 years into a 200-year business plan. So we're right at the start, and you're all part of that journey.
So that's Hambledon's story. Let's talk about the wine.
We've already tasted the two classic cuvées. So this one here, again at £28, very champagne-like in some ways, but the flavour profile is a little bit different. It's very, very appley. It's very refreshing. I kind of felt it was really English. I think it's that kind of apple orchard cider sort of stuff just kind of rolling around my head. So it's very different in taste to champagne. Again, good acidity. Even better on the acidity for me is the rosé. I think you preferred this one to the white.
I did actually, surprisingly enough. I almost exclusively prefer a white. I'm not the hugest fan of rosé, but yeah, I really did. I think it added that extra level of complexity.
And it's surprisingly different to the straight white one, much more so than you'd expect with a sort of a house white versus a house rosé from a Grand Marque champagne producer. I believe very deliberately so. And it's not like a rosé, and again, I believe very deliberately so. I don't think these guys do anything by accident. It's all by design. And the blend's quite interesting in this for a rosé. It's 90% Chardonnay, 10% Pinot Noir, so it's very subtle. So you get the strawberries coming through and the red fruits from the Pinot, but because it's quite low in the blend, most rosés have a lot more red grapes or black grapes in the mix. It's much more Chardonnay focused, so it's got that real acidity, really precise. Makes it a great aperitif wine, and I think they've kind of tuned that one in very well. And lastly, we have the Premier Cuvée, which we haven't tasted. Because I think this is the best looking bottle of wine I've ever seen, we haven't opened it. And I do mean that. I'm not just being nice to them. It reminds me of Krug. If Krug was English and had cricket bats on their label, then this is what their wine would look like, and that can only be a good thing. So we deliberately haven't opened it, so we didn't ruin the aesthetic. So we're going to open it now and then taste some. So this is going to need to be a one-take wonder. And we might even fast forward through this bit. I'm still getting a bit more of that a little bit of that appley sort of lick to it, some citrus in there. Let's give it a taste. Interesting. Yeah. In a good way, this is kind of what I was hoping it would be. It's kind of what I expected.
Yeah.
You know, it's the analogy I always use with wines like these is it's like, you know, you're looking through binoculars and everything looks lovely, and then somebody just nudges it a little bit, and suddenly what you thought was focused, now it's focused. So again, it's just up a rung or two, you know. It feels as if it's maybe had a little bit more lees aging. There's certainly a bit more of that sort of slightly sweet briochiness coming through. A bit of orange in there. It's citrusy, but it's more in the orange sort of side of things. A little lick of apple. Again, distinctly different to the others, but with a clear sort of familial sort of resemblance. A lot of people, when they say that they don't like champagne, don't like it because it's sort of too dry, or it's got a slightly harsh edge to it. That whilst this has got the precision on that linear acidity that is really their style, it hasn't got any of that harshness that you might expect from sort of even quite expensive champagne. You know, I can feel that acidity coming through. You know, again, my palate is getting warmed up. I think it's a really high quality bottle of wine, as well as being the best looking bottle of wine I've ever seen. In terms of WES and scoring, as regular viewers will know, we don't take that stuff too seriously. We don't think it's that important in the scheme of things, but what it's about is trying to assess value in terms of quality and particularly suitability for occasion. So scoring with sort of good champagne competing fizz is almost kind of redundant. These aren't the cheapest wines around, so they're not quite sort of nudging a 10, but on our Wesometer, I'm more than happy to give these wines, 9, 9, 9, and arguably the people needing to call emergency services could be some non-vintage Grand Marque champagne producers, because these guys are coming after you. They're coming after you hard. They're taking this stuff seriously, and I think they just might win.
For sure.
Cheers.
Cheers.